Let me introduce myself. My name is Mark Landreneau, and I'm from Cajun country in Louisiana. I don't use the derogatory sign for Louisiana. I use the polite LA sign for Louisiana. I was born deaf, and I have Usher syndrome. This is a combination of deafness and a loss of visual field over time. I also have night blindness, and it's difficult for me to see in dimly lit areas. As well, I have a balance problem, and those are the symptoms that go along with Usher syndrome. Let me tell you a bit about my family. There are 5 boys in the family, and I'm the baby. My parents can both hear, and my father, so that's the makeup of my family. I did go to the state residential school, and my mother found out about this school from reading an article in the newspaper. And she also recalled an uncle's wife's sister who was older who also had gone to this school. So that's how they decided to send my brother and I to the residential school. I was very fortunate that she made that decision. I entered school when I was 6, and I already had a strong language base because I signed and communicated with my brother for 6 years before I started school. And many of my classmates had parents who were deaf and had siblings who were also deaf. So we were very adept with our language, even in the very first grade. And I enjoyed school. I remember playing and having such a good time with the kids. Even in the dark outside at night, we would play hide and seek. And I remember still being able to participate and having a good time. I could see just fine. But later I started to notice things. One example is when we were in the dorm in the evening, all the kids in their beds, we would start to play and get into stuff, and we had our stuffed animals that we played with, and mine was a little goat, little pink goat. And we would throw our stuffed animals at each other, back and forth all over the room. And I could do this initially, but at some point I started not being able to find where that little goat disappeared to. And I would look and look, but I just, in the dark couldn't find him. And it would sometimes be the next morning that, with the lights turned on, that I could find this little thing. But the rest of the kids were able to play and throw their stuffed animals around. They could even communicate in sign language, which I wasn't able to do in the dark. So that was one thing that started to come to mind about something was going on with my eyes. Another thing had to do with football. I loved football, and I was really good at it, rough and tough. We didn't play the regular football game with 2 teams. We played with one person punting, kicked the ball, and the rest of us would try to get the ball, and whoever actually caught it would then try to make a beeline to the end zone, and we would all try to tackle that person. Well, we would move up and down the field that way, 40-yard, 50-yard, whatever, moving back and forth. And, of course, the goal was to make a touchdown. And I can remember that I was able to see the football coming, and I could catch it. I could run down the field. But then as time went by, I wouldn't be able to see where the football was going. And sometimes it would go to somebody. I would see who caught it. I'd go running to tackle them, but I would run into somebody. And the kids would start to tease me then, saying, "What are you, blind?" Or they would call me hoarse, like I had blinders on. And I started to realize that something was different about me. Now, this was when I was about 10 years old. And I started basically withdrawing from activities like that and stayed in the dorm room where it was well lit. And I would study. I would talk with my friends, but it just felt safer there because I could see better. I recall going to class, and I would be trying to watch the teacher sign. And if somebody else started signing, because of the way the turn-taking happened so rapidly, I couldn't locate the next person who was signing. So I ended up sitting on the end. So if it was a semicircle or rows, I would sit on one end so that I could scan and see who was signing. And this just happened naturally. No one taught me or said anything about it. I just did it as an accommodation for myself. Also, when the teacher was writing on the board, it would be very difficult for me to see, and I would move up closer to copy the work on the board. And the same thing happened if the information was coming on a projector. I'd have to go up close, and I was always the last person to finish my work. And again, I was thinking, boy, there is something going on here, but I didn't know what it was. Now, I found out later that the Louisiana School for the Deaf had many students with Usher syndrome, but I didn't know that at the time. But funny, when in the dark, I remember all these things that happened to me, and nobody, teachers, counselors, even my parents, never mentioned a word about what was going on with my eyes until this counselor at the Florida school talked to me about it. So finally, I felt more comfortable, and when things came up, I could talk to him, and my teachers knew I had this condition, so things went pretty well. When I graduated, while I was at Gallaudet, I was still driving, still had my car, and later on, Art told me stories about his driving experiences. But I used my car to make the drive from Louisiana to Gallaudet, and then I would leave my car parked at Gallaudet and use the bus, or ride the bike, take the subway to get around locally. But I'd still use my car, on holidays to go home to Louisiana and travel about. I would drive my car while I was in Louisiana to get to people's houses and catch up with folks, because we didn't have any kind of transit system there, so I basically had to use my car, and I remember enjoying it. And at the same time, thinking about, should I still be driving or not? Because I had conversations with Art, who talked about his feelings when he stopped driving and how difficult that was. And I was thinking about, at some point, I would probably have to do that as well. And one time when I was in Louisiana, I remember it was at Christmas time, or I was going to a New Year's Eve party, and a deaf club had put this on, and I was driving there to the party. I had a friend with me who was fully blind, deaf-blind person, and we were driving to this deaf club out in the country. It was also at night, and of course it was hard for me to see. I noticed that the speed limit was 45 miles an hour, so I slowed down. But of course, a cop was right behind me with his lights flashing, and so I pulled off. I was sitting in the car thinking, oh boy, they're probably very, very strict tonight because it's New Year's Eve, right? And they're watching for drunk drivers. So I communicate tactily with my friend that, yes, indeed, a cop is behind me. I turn the light on and I write a note that I am planning to give to the cop. I don't want to put it in my pocket to whip out because I don't want the cop to misunderstand and thinking I'm pulling a gun. So I just write the note and have it ready and explain that I was in the process of slowing down to 45 miles per hour. And just see what his reaction was, hoping that, he would understand or would excuse me, and I felt sure that that's why it was the speed limit sign. Well, I waited for the cop, but they never did come to my door. But in my rearview mirror, I saw the lights flashing and realized he wanted me to come out and go to his car. So, I'm just panicked thinking I have to get out and walk in the dark with the lights in my eyes. And as well, to make matters worse, I had pulled off and I was on the shoulder of the road with a slight incline. So with my balance, trying to negotiate the incline, maintain my balance in light of these bright glare of the cop's car. I'm trying to, not look like I'm drunk, which a lot of Usher's people do when they're walking because of the balance problems. I just tried to make a straight line to his car. Well, he looked at me, and I brought my note to him, and he turned his flashlight on, read the note, asked me for my license, which I gave him, and then he motioned to me to, slow it down. Didn't give me a ticket. So I motioned back that, yes, indeed, I would slow it down, and I thought, boy, I have made it. And I started walking back, trying to keep in a straight line. I don't know if I did or not, but I finally got in the car and told my friend that I didn't get a ticket, We were both relieved and went off to the party. We still went to that party. We didn't go home. We didn't let it ruin our night. But I was very careful, and certainly very careful coming back home, not to go over the speed limit. But I just remember these stories of how difficult it was to drive. I wanted to drive, but feeling bad about driving and trying to figure this whole thing out.